This video is about academic integrity and the use of generative AI in higher education. And as I'm sure all of you know, the whole of the education sector globally is grappling with this right now, so I can't pretend that I'm the world's leading expert on generative AI and academic integrity, but I can at least guarantee that what I'm giving you information on is what works for the many hundreds of students who I teach and myself in my own units. So it's what's happening at the coalface right this minute. In terms of academic integrity, what we really are referring to is students ensuring that the work that they do has genuinely been undertaken by themselves, and when they submit assessment tasks, that those assessment tasks are a genuine reflection of the student's personal learning and understanding, that they're not outsourcing any of that work to any other medium, whether it's another person or to generative AI. Now, at the end of the day, this becomes really stressful for students, I think, because particularly in the advent of generative AI, the landscape has become really murky in terms of what's appropriate and what's not. And also it's harder, I think, for students to make sure they're retaining evidence that they have appropriately engaged in their tasks. So the reasons why I guess students and families might want to make sure that they're aware of this is that universities has very significant and serious consequences for students who are demonstrated or shown to have undertaken academic misconduct, which can be a really stressful thing. I guess I would also say that there are many reasons why a student might go down that pathway. And there's no judgment here. I know that most students who end up in that boat aren't maliciously doing it and trying to game the system and kind of get ahead of their fellow classmates. A lot of students just end up very stressed and overworked and overwhelmed, particularly when they're balancing things like paid work or their mental health or carers' responsibilities on top of that. So I will say I've got a much more in-depth, I guess, resource in my online course around all of the different things that universities classify as academic misconduct and how to avoid them. Please check out that resource if you want some more information. But in terms of this video, I'd like to give some tips around what I tell my students about appropriate use of generative AI. And hopefully this can be a starting point to start the conversation, but also to really help. So generative AI, what I would say to my students is, the reason I talk about this a lot is that I really want my students to be employable at the end of their degree. As a previous program director, I used to talk to the people, the stakeholders who would employ our students, and I would often talk about those soft skills that students would have, including their ability to learn on the job. And what I would say to my students is, if you are having to use generative AI in order to do tasks, so these are things you cannot do yourself, the only way you're able to do these tasks is because you're outsourcing them to generative AI, then I would say you are not employable. Those employers that I mentioned before, they absolutely would not use the money on a staff member's salary if they could actually use generative AI to do the same task for free. And I don't want that to happen to my students. I don't want my students' jobs to be outsourced to generative AI, which means they have to be able to value add. So if you're tempted to use generative AI because you don't know how to do something, then I would suggest that you think again, because it probably means that it's going to be much harder for you to get a job at the end of your degree. Another way to think about it that I say to my students is, it's fair enough to use generative AI if you are the expert and you're using it as the tool. So you have the information and you're using it perhaps to do something more quickly. You're using it to summarize some information or to collate some data that you then actually go on to analyze or report back on, because you have those higher order skills that the generative AI does not. That's a great use of generative AI. If, however, instead of you being the expert using generative AI as a tool, if you are using it as the expert, it makes it sound like I'm going to say, and you are the tool, and that's not what I mean. That's a terrible way to put it. But if you're using genAI as the expert because you really don't know how to do the task, then I would say that's not a good use, whether it's for your study or in the workplace. The reason that's not good for your study is that if you are asking genAI to do things for you or explain things to you, you're missing out on all of those critical cognitive learning steps. And if you want to know more information about the cognitive science of learning, I'd be very happy to talk to you for hours about it, but it really does mean that you are not getting that information that you need. The other thing I'd say is, someone who teaches foundational science, I can put a lot of my content and my questions into ChatGPT, for example, and I get some of them right, but I get some of them spectacularly wrong. And if you're a person who can't tell the difference because you're needing to use genAI to do the work for you, then essentially you're just getting the wrong answers a bunch of the time. And not only is that really poor for your learning, but again, it means you're not employable at the end. And I really want you to be employable. I want you to be successful. And I want you to feel satisfaction that you've learned something and you've accomplished something and you now know something that you didn't know before. So I hope this has been helpful. Just this idea of how to tell if generative AI is useful for you or not, and how to really know that or feel this deep sense of pride that you don't want to use it because you want to be employable at the end. As I said, it's a really nuanced topic and there is a lot more information that I have to share on it. So if you think that would be helpful, please head to my online course. There's a lot more information there. But in the meantime, I hope this was a little snippet that was helpful. Happy study.